He is a king who does not weep anymore. He is a king who forgot how. 3 winters since she died, and the throne room still smells of her, if you ask the old wolves who remember. A stranger walks into his court for a debt about turnips and grain tax. The king goes still as stone. His wolf, silent for 3 years, lifts its head in his chest. She smells like the sea his mate used to dream about and never saw. She smells like a woman who has been dead 3 winters. The healer's apprentice does not know why the most powerful man alive looks at her like a ghost. She does not know why she dreams every night of a love she has never lived. She does not know why she wakes with salt on her tongue from a sea she has never seen. What do you do when the dead come back wearing someone else's face? What do you do when your heart remembers a woman your mind has never met? There is a room in the castle of Vayrith that no one enters anymore. The servants call it the sun room, though no sun has touched it in 3 years. The heavy drapes drawn and pinned, the windows shuttered, because light, the king once said, was something Aveline had loved too much for him to bear alone. They left her embroidery hoop on the little table by the window, the needle still through the linen, half a foxglove stitched in faded violet thread. No one has finished it. No one will. This is where you find Alpha King Fenwick most mornings. Before the court wakes, before the world demands a king of him again, he sits in the chair that was hers. He does not speak. The wolf inside him, the part of every shifter that howls and runs and hungers, has not howled in 3 years. It lies down in him like something that has simply stopped trying. He used to wear her token at his throat, a small carved wolf, soapstone, gray as a winter sky, that she'd given him the night she chose him in front of the whole pack. He wore it through the funeral. He wore it through 2 winters of a kingdom that grieved alongside him because a king's mate is a kingdom's mate, in ways no decree can undo. He took it off only this past spring, when his advisor, Cale, found him standing at the edge of the lake at dawn with the soapstone wolf in his palm, and an expression that frightened the old man more than any battle ever had. He didn't throw it away. He doesn't have that kind of cruelty left in him, even toward grief. He put it in a drawer, but his hand still goes to his throat sometimes, in the middle of a council meeting, in the middle of a sentence, and finds nothing there, and something in his face closes like a door. "My king," Cale's voice, soft with the particular care you use around something broken that you love. "The grain steward is here, and there's a girl with him. Says she's owed payment for healing his daughter's fever." Fenwick doesn't look up from the ledger he isn't reading. "Pay her. She wants to say it to your face." Apparently, the steward's man tried to short her, and she walked 4 days to make sure it didn't happen twice. Something almost like amusement moves through Fenwick, distant as weather on another mountain. 4 days. For 3 coppers. For 4 coppers, I'm told. She's specific about it. He should not have looked up. That is the thought that will return to him, later, in the dark. He should have simply nodded, signed something. Let the steward's clerk handle 4 coppers and a stubborn girl from a village he's never visited. Kings do not need to look up for 4 coppers. He looks up. She is standing in the doorway of his throne room in a healer's plain wool, sleeves rolled to the elbow, dust of the road still on her boots, and her hair, dark, loose of its braid on one side where the wind has worried it free, catches the torchlight the way water catches light, restless and alive. She is saying something to the steward beside her, chin lifted, a girl who has clearly practiced this speech the entire 4 days of walking and means to deliver every word of it. And then the scent reaches him. It comes the way grief comes, without warning, without mercy, a wave that does not ask permission to break over you. Salt and warm bread and something green, something like crushed mint underfoot in summer, and beneath all of it, unmistakably, impossibly, the particular note that is not a flower or a fruit or anything nameable, the note that was hers and only hers, the one he used to bury his face in her hair to find. The wolf inside him, 3 years silent, 3 years a held breath, opens its throat and howls, not aloud, not where anyone can hear it. But Fenwick feels it tear up through his chest, like something coming back from the dead, and his hand closes white-knuckled on the arm of the throne, and the room tilts, and for one suspended, terrible moment the Alpha King of Vaerith cannot remember how to breathe. "My king?" Kael's voice. Careful, urgent beneath the care. The girl in the doorway has stopped speaking. She is looking at him the way you look at something you don't understand and aren't sure is safe. The way you'd look at a wolf gone still, in the road trying to decide if stillness means peace or the moment before it strikes. "Your Majesty," she says, and her voice is wrong. It is not Aveline's voice, lower and rougher with road dust, a stranger's voice, and still something in his chest answers it like a name being called across a field. "Forgive me. I didn't mean to keep you." He doesn't answer. He can't. He is staring at a woman he has never met with the particular devastated attention of a man who has just watched the dead get up and walk. The steward, sensing something gone strange in the air, bows hastily. "My king, this is Gwyn, the healer's apprentice from Thistlemere. She only wants. Leave us." The 2 words come out of him rough, lower than he meant, and the whole hall seems to flinch at the sound of their king, speaking more than a sentence for the first time in longer than anyone wants to count. "My king, the matter of the coppers. Pay her double. Leave us." The steward goes. The clerks go. Even Kael, after one long look at his king's face, ushers the last of the court out and pulls the great doors closed, though Fenwick can feel him standing just beyond them. Listening, the way you listen at the door of a sick room. Which leaves the girl named Gwyn, standing alone in the echoing throne room of a kingdom's grief. 4 coppers richer and entirely unsure why the most powerful man in the realm is looking at her, as though she has personally wronged him simply by existing. "Your Majesty," she says again, carefully, the way you'd talk to someone you suspect might be unwell. "Are you? Is something the matter?" He doesn't move from the throne. His knuckles are still white on the carved wolf's head arm of it. "Your name," he says. "Say your name again." "Gwyn." A small, wary pause. "Gwyn Ashford. From Thistlemere, 3 valleys west. I haven't done anything. I only came for the coppers. I swear it on the moon. You smell like the sea." The words come out of him before he can stop them, raw and strange, and he watches her face do something complicated. Confusion first, then a flush of something closer to alarm, one hand coming up unconsciously to her own collar as if she might catch the offending scent and explain it. What? You smell like the sea," he says again, quieter now. And he is rising from the throne, though his legs do not feel entirely his own, crossing the space between them with the slow, disbelieving care of a man approaching something that might shatter if he moves wrong. Salt, and something green. And he stops a pace from her, close enough now that there is no mistaking it, no trick of distance or memory, no grief-softened error. It is her. It is exactly her, down to the low note beneath the rest that he never had a name for and never needed one, because it only ever belonged to one person in the whole turning world. His hand lifts, halfway to her face, and stops, hovering, shaking very slightly, a king's hand that has not trembled in front of his court in 3 years of careful iron composure. "Who are you?" he says, and it isn't really a question anymore. It is closer to a plea. Gwyn takes a step back. Not far, there's nowhere far to go, and some instinct older than sense keeps her rooted, even as every practical part of her screams to run from a king who has gone strange and wild-eyed in front of her. "I told you. I'm a healer's apprentice. I don't know you. I have never been to this castle in my life, Your Majesty. I don't know what you think you're smelling. But I assure you, I am exactly who I said I was." 3 years, he says, and his voice cracks on the number. Cracks like ice giving way on a lake. 3 years I have not smelled this. 3 years I thought I would die without ever smelling this again. And you walk into my hall for 4 coppers, and you smell like my dead wife. The silence that follows is enormous. It has weight, that silence. It presses on the room, on the dust-thick light through the high windows, on Gwyn's pulse, where it has gone suddenly, violently fast in her throat. Your wife, she repeats faintly. My mate. His hand finally falls, defeated, back to his side, but his eyes don't leave her, can't leave her. Drink her in the way a starving man looks at bread he isn't sure is real. She died 3 years ago. Aveline. His jaw works, it doesn't matter how. She died, and I have not smelled anything like her since, not once, not in 3 years, and now a stranger walks into my throne room, and she is wearing my dead mate's scent like a coat she borrowed and forgot to give back. I don't. Gwyn's voice has gone thin, frightened in a way that has nothing to do with the king's title, and everything to do with the way the floor of her certainty has just tilted. I don't know your wife. I never knew anyone named Aveline. I have lived my whole life in Thistlemere. I've never even been to the capital before this week. I don't understand what you think is happening, but I am not whoever you think I am. He looks at her for a long moment, and something in his face, something that has been frozen so long it has nearly forgotten how to move, flickers just once, with a grief so raw it is almost unbearable to witness. No, he says quietly, almost to himself. No, I don't suppose you are. He turns away from her then, back toward the throne, and the line of his shoulders is the line of a man holding himself together by main force, the way you'd hold a cracked vessel closed with your own 2 hands so the water inside doesn't spill. Forgive me, he says, not looking at her. You came for coppers. You have your coppers. You may go. But Gwyn does not go. She stands in the doorway of a strange castle, in a stranger's grief, with her own pulse loud in her ears, and something old and unnamed in her chest that does not want to leave this room, that aches, actually aches, a physical thing beneath her ribs, at the sight of a man's back bowed under a weight she cannot see. Your Majesty, she says. He doesn't turn. I dream about the sea, she says, and her voice shakes on it, because she has never told anyone this, not her mother. Not the old healer who raised her, not a single living soul. I've never seen it. Thistlemere is 3 valleys from any coast, but I dream of it almost every night. I wake up with the taste of salt on my tongue, like I've swallowed half the ocean in my sleep. I always thought I was mad. Now he turns. Slowly, as if turning too fast might break whatever fragile, impossible thing has just opened in the air between them. What else, he says. What else do you dream? And Gwyn, 24 years old, 4 days of road dust on her boots, holding 4 coppers, she walked 100 miles to claim, opens her mouth to answer a grieving king's question, and has absolutely no idea that she is about to unmake everything either of them thought they understood about the dead. It takes 3 weeks before the kingdom notices, and 3 weeks before Gwyn admits to herself what is happening, though in both cases the truth has been obvious far longer to everyone who isn't living inside it. The dreams do not stop. If anything, they grow sharper after that first conversation in the throne room, as though naming them to someone, finally, after a lifetime of swallowing them down like a secret shame, has cracked something open that cannot be closed again. She dreams of a man's hands, broad and scarred across the knuckles, lacing fingers through hers at a window overlooking water she has never seen with her waking eyes. She dreams of laughing at something he said, low and dry, a joke that lands only because of how long it's been since someone could make him laugh at all. She dreams of a wedding cloak, the color of dusk, and a soapstone wolf pressed into her palm, and a voice. Not Fenwick's voice, not quite, gentler somehow, less worn down by grief, saying her name, Aveline, not her own name, a stranger's. She wakes from these dreams with her heart slamming, and her sheets damp with sweat, and the taste of salt thick on her tongue, and she tells herself, every single time, that it is nothing, that it is exhaustion, or the strange food of the capital disagreeing with her stomach, or simple suggestion. She met a grieving man who told her a sad story. Of course her mind has gone and built a fantasy from it. Minds do strange things with grief that isn't even their own. She tells herself this on the morning she is summoned, again, to the castle, ostensibly to consult on a fever sweeping the lower town. Though everyone from the steward to the stable boy seems to understand that the king has requested her for presence specifically, and the fever is merely the excuse that makes it proper. She tells herself this as she walks the long gallery toward the room they call the sunroom. Drapes finally cracked an inch of daylight for the first time in 3 years, and finds Fenwick sitting in a chair beside an embroidery hoop with a half-finished foxglove on it, his elbows on his knees, his head bowed, looking like a man who has aged a decade since she saw him last and slept none of the days in between. "You came," he says, without looking up. "You sent for me." She stays in the doorway. Some animal part of her, and she will only later understand exactly how literal that phrase is, does not want to cross the threshold, as if crossing it commits her to something she isn't ready to name. Is it true fever spreading through the lower wards? Yes. Mild cases. Your apprenticeship will manage it without me telling you how to do your work. He finally lifts his head. There are shadows under his eyes that weren't there 3 weeks ago. Or perhaps they were always there, and she simply hadn't been close enough, hadn't been let close enough, to see them. I asked you here because I haven't slept since you described what she was wearing. In your dream, the dusk-colored cloak. Gwyn's mouth goes dry. It's just a dream, Your Majesty. Aveline's wedding cloak was dyed with crushed bramblethorn and indigo. It is a very particular color. It does not exist in any dye house outside the royal weavers, because the formula died with the weaver who made it 12 years ago, before either of us was even bonded. His voice is very level, very careful, the voice of a man laying down each word like a stone he isn't sure will bear weight. You described that exact color to me. Dusk over water, you said. That is precisely how she described it the day she chose me. The silence stretches. I don't know how I know that, Gwyn says, and for the first time her wariness cracks into something closer to fear. Not fear of him, she realizes distantly, but fear of herself, of whatever strange unmapped country exists inside her own skull that she has apparently never had the courage to explore. I don't know why I dream these things. I've told myself for years it's just sleep doing strange things. Everyone has odd dreams. Not everyone dreams another dead woman's wedding cloak down to the dye. He stands. He doesn't come toward her this time. He seems, if anything, determined to keep distance between them, as though he has decided that proximity to her is a danger he must ration like medicine. I'm not telling you this to frighten you. I'm telling you because I have spent 3 years as a hollow thing wearing a crown, and you walked into my hall smelling like the only thing I ever wanted to smell again, describing dreams that should be impossible for you to have, and I find that I cannot simply let you walk back to Thistlemere and forget any of this happened. I tried. I sent the steward to settle your coppers fairly so you'd have no reason to return. And then I lay awake every night since, unable to stop thinking about the sea you've never seen. What do you want from me? It comes out sharper than she intends, frightened sharp, the voice of someone cornered by a truth too large to hold. I don't know. He says it simply, without armor, and something about the plainness of it disarms her more than any grand declaration could have. I have not wanted anything in 3 years. I had stopped expecting to. And then you stood in my doorway over 4 coppers, and something in me that I thought had died with her sat up and started howling, and I don't have an explanation for that, Gwyn. I only have the howling. It is the first time he has said her name. Her actual name. Not a question, not a stranger's title. Just Gwyn, said low and rough, like something he's relieved to finally be allowed to say. And something in her chest answers it. Not metaphorically. Not the poetic ache of being moved by a sad king's confession. Something physical, immediate, a warmth that floods up from low in her belly and settles behind her sternum, like a hand placed flat over a wound she didn't know she was carrying, and beneath it, fainter, almost soundless, Something that feels absurdly, impossibly like recognition. Like a key turning in a lock she didn't know she had. She takes an involuntary step back. He notices. Of course he notices. He notices everything about her now. Has noticed everything about her since the moment the scent of her hit him in that hall. And something flickers across his face. Equal parts hope. And the specific terror of a man who has been disappointed by hope before. I should go, she says. You should. He doesn't try to stop her. His hands stay at his sides carefully, deliberately, though she sees the muscle in his jaw working with the effort of it. But you came when I sent for you, and I find I am already dreading the day you decide not to come again. She leaves the sunroom faster than dignity strictly requires, and she does not look back. And she tells herself the whole walk down the long gallery and out through the castle gates that this is madness. That whatever strange thing is happening to her does not have to be claimed. That a girl can simply choose not to fall down a hole just because someone else is standing, at the bottom of it, calling her name. She tells herself this, and 3 days later, she comes back anyway, with no fever to attend to, no coppers to collect, no excuse at all except that she could not make herself stay away. And the look on Fenwick's face when he finds her standing once more in his doorway is not triumph. It is something closer to relief so absolute it nearly buckles him. I had a different dream last night, she says, before he can speak because she needs to say it before her nerve fails her. I dreamed you laughed. Properly laughed. Not the half thing you do now, where it doesn't reach your eyes. You laughed because I told you the goats had gotten into the laundry again, and you said something about how a king shouldn't have to live in fear of livestock, and then you laughed so hard you had to sit down on the wet grass, and I laughed too, because I'd never seen you laugh like that before. In the dream, I mean. I'd never seen you laugh like that before in the dream. Fenwick has gone very still. There were no goats, he says, very quietly. There was a flock of geese. Aveline let them into the east laundry yard on purpose, the spring before she died, because she said I needed something to laugh at besides the council's complaints. I have never told anyone that story. Not Cale. Not a single soul. I locked it away because it hurt too much to take it out and look at it. Gwyn's pulse roars in her ears. I don't understand what's happening to me. Neither do I. He crosses the room to her now, finally, slowly, the way you'd approach something wild and lovely that might startle at sudden movement, and stops close enough that she can feel the warmth radiating off him, can smell. Beneath the leather and wood smoke and the particular musk of his wolf held carefully leashed. Something that makes her own breath catch, unbidden, treacherous. But I am done pretending I don't want to find out. His hand lifts again as it did 3 weeks ago in the throne room, and this time it does not stop halfway. His fingers brush her jaw, feather-light, the touch of a man half convinced she might dissolve under it like mist. And Gwyn, who has spent 3 weeks telling herself this is madness, who has every sensible reason in the world to step back, finds that her body will not obey her. She leans very slightly into his hand. Neither of them speaks. The silence between them is not empty. It is full of 3 years of grief and 24 years of unexplained dreams, an ascent that should not exist twice in one world, and underneath all of it, terrifying and undeniable, a pull that neither of them asked for and neither of them, in this moment, wants to resist. I am afraid of you, Gwyn whispers, and it is the truest thing she has said since she walked into his court. Good, Fenwick says, just as quietly, his thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone, like a man memorizing something he is terrified to lose twice. I am afraid of you too. It is the closest thing to a confession either of them has the courage to make, and it will be 6 more days before either of them admits, even to themselves, what that fear has already become. There is an advisor in this story who has carried a secret for 3 years the way other men carry old wounds. Quietly, constantly, in the part of the body that never fully heals. Cale has served House Verith, since before Fenwick was old enough to hold a sword properly. And he loved Aveline the way you love a daughter you never had, fierce and unspoken, in the particular currency of a man who shows devotion through duty rather than words. He was there the night she died. He was the one who told the kingdom what they needed to hear, and he has lived inside that lie every single day since, watching it hollow out his king like rot, working through a tree from the inside, watching the kingdom mourn a story that was never entirely true. He watches Gwyn now from the gallery shadows, 3 weeks into her strange orbit around his king, and his hands shake faintly around the cup of wine he isn't drinking. He knows what she is. He has known, with growing, sick certainty, since the day she walked through that doorway and the whole hall went electric with a scent that should not exist in this world anymore. He has spent 3 weeks watching his king come back to life one terrified inch at a time, and 3 weeks deciding and failing to decide whether the truth he carries is a mercy or the cruelest thing he could possibly do to either of them. He finds Fenwick alone in the sunroom, near midnight. The drapes pulled fully open now for the first time in 3 years, moonlight pooling silver across the floor where Aveline's embroidery hoop still sits, untouched, the foxglove forever half-stitched. You should tell her, Cale says, without preamble, because he is too old and too tired to dress the words up in anything gentler. Fenwick doesn't turn from the window. Tell her what? What you suspect, what I suspect. Cale sets the cup down, hard enough that it cracks against the table. Or I will tell her myself, and you will not enjoy hearing it secondhand from an old man, instead of from the woman who loves you. That gets Fenwick's attention. He turns, slowly, and the look on his face is not anger. It is something closer to dread, the look of a man who has spent 3 weeks not asking a question because he is terrified of every possible answer. Say it, he says, whatever it is you've been carrying since the day she walked into my hall. Say it now, Cale, because I am done living half a life out of fear of what I might learn. Cale is quiet for a long moment. When he speaks, his voice has the particular flatness of a man finally setting down a weight he has carried so long it has become indistinguishable from his own bones. Aveline did not die of fever, he says. That is what we told the kingdom, because the truth was too dangerous to speak aloud, and because she begged me with her last clear hours to protect you from it. She was poisoned, slowly over months, by someone inside this court who feared what your bonded strength together would mean for their own ambitions. I found the poison in her blood myself, 3 days before she died, when it was already too late to reverse what had been done to her. I have spent 3 years protecting you from that knowledge, because I did not believe you could survive both the grief and the rage of it at once. The room has gone utterly silent. Fenwick's face has drained of color, and his hands, when Cale looks at them, are shaking, not with weakness, but with the particular violence of a grief 3 years frozen, finally beginning, catastrophically, to move. Who? Fenwick says, and the word comes out of him low and terrible, more growl than speech. That is the second part of what I have to tell you, and it is the part that concerns the girl in your sunroom. Cale's voice does not waver, though his eyes are wet in the moonlight. Aveline knew, near the end, what was being done to her. She was a healer in her own right, trained by the same old woman who trained half the apprentices in this kingdom. And she understood things about blood and bonds that even I did not fully grasp. In her last days, she told me something I did not believe, could not believe, until 3 weeks ago, when a stranger walked through your doors smelling exactly like her. Tell me. Fenwick's voice has dropped to something raw, something that does not sound like a king at all, only a man standing at the edge of an answer he both needs and cannot bear. Mate bonds are not only of the body, my king. You know this. Every shifter knows the old stories, even if we've stopped believing them as more than stories. A bond strong enough, true enough, does not simply end with the heart that stopped beating. It seeks. It waits. It finds a vessel willing to carry it forward. Not the same soul reborn, not some neat resurrection the bards would sing of, but something stranger and sadder, and far more real. An echo strong enough to dream another woman's memories, to carry another woman's scent, to be drawn, against all sense, toward a grief she had no part in causing. Cale's voice finally breaks, just slightly, on the last of it. Aveline told me, before she died, that if her bond to you was strong enough, and it was, Fenwick, it was the strongest bond this court has seen in 2 generations. It would not simply vanish into the dark with her. It would look for a way back to you, not as her. As someone new, someone whole, someone who could love you without the weight of dying for it twice. Fenwick sits down very suddenly, as though his legs have simply stopped agreeing to hold him. "You're telling me," he says, very slowly, "that Gwyn is. I am telling you that Gwyn is not Aveline." Cale crosses to him, kneels in front of his king the way he has not knelt in front of anyone in decades, his old hands closing around Fenwick's. "I want that understood with absolute clarity, because it is the single most important truth in this entire terrible, impossible tangle. She is not your dead wife wearing new skin. She has her own life, her own mother who raised her, her own 24 years that have nothing to do with Aveline at all. But the bond you shared with Aveline, the thing that made you howl the moment she walked into your hall, that bond did not die with her body. It found purchase in a girl who never asked for it, who has spent her whole life thinking her dreams were madness, and it has been quietly, patiently working its way toward you, ever since, the way water finds its way back to the sea no matter how many stones you stack in the way." Fenwick's breathing has gone ragged, uneven, the breathing of a man holding back a flood by sheer force of will. She has no idea, no. And she deserves to know before this goes any further, because what you are both walking toward is not a simple second chance at love. It is a reckoning. Whoever poisoned Aveline is still in this court, Fenwick, still close to your throne. And if they understand what Gwyn is, what she carries, they will see her as the same threat they saw in Aveline, and they will not hesitate twice. The moonlight has shifted across the floor by the time Fenwick speaks again, his voice steadier now, though something in it has changed permanently, the way a bone sets crooked after a break, and never quite straightens. "Then we tell her everything," he says. "All of it. The bond, the poison, the danger. I will not build whatever this is on another lie in this house, Cale. We have built enough lies in this house to bury a kingdom." Cale nods slowly, and something like relief moves through his weathered face. The relief of a man who has finally, after 3 years, set his burden down somewhere it can be shared. "There is one more thing," he says quietly as Fenwick rises. "Aveline asked me that last night to give you something if this ever came to pass. I have kept it in my own rooms for 3 years, waiting for a sign I was nearly certain would never come." He produces, from inside his coat, a small folded letter, the wax seal long since gone brittle with age, and presses it into Fenwick's hands with the particular gravity of a man delivering the last words of someone he loved. Fenwick stares down at his dead wife's handwriting on the outside of the letter. His name, in her hand, in ink 3 years faded. And for the first time since the night she died, the Alpha King of Vayrith puts his face in his hands and weeps. He does not read the letter that night. He sits with it in the moonlit sunroom long after Cale has gone, turning it over and over in his hands, and somewhere past midnight he understands that he is afraid, not of what it says, but of what reading it will finally let him close. Some part of him has kept Aveline alive these 3 years by refusing every door that might shut behind her for good. This letter is a door. He is not ready, yet, to walk through it alone. He brings it to Gwyn instead. She is in the lower wards when he finds her, sleeves rolled, hands steady, pressing a cool cloth to a feverish child's forehead, with the particular, unhurried competence of someone who has done this 100 times and will do it 100 more without complaint. She does not notice him in the doorway at first. He watches her a long moment, watches the gentleness in her, entirely her own, nothing borrowed from a dead woman's memory, and something in his chest, raw from the night before, aches with a tenderness that has nothing to do with ghosts at all. "You're staring," she says, without looking up, a small smile tugging at her mouth. "It's rude, you know. Even for a king, I'm aware." He doesn't apologize. He crosses the room instead and crouches beside the cot and the feverish child, a boy of perhaps 6, eyes glassy with sickness, stares up at him with the particular wide-eyed wonder children reserve for kings and miracles. "You're the king," the boy says, awed through chapped lips. "I am." Fenwick's mouth curves, faint but real. The first genuine warmth Gwyn has seen on his face that isn't aimed at her. "And you're going to feel much better by morning if you let this healer do her work without arguing about the taste of her tinctures." The boy giggles, weak but real, and Gwyn watches the exchange with something soft and unguarded moving across her own face before she catches herself and busies her hands with the cloth again. "You came to find me for a reason," she says, once the boy has drifted into uneasy sleep and they've stepped into the corridor, away from the ward's heat and noise. "What is it?" He could lie. He could say he simply wanted to see her, which would even be true, and leave the letter folded in his coat for another night, another year, another lifetime of avoiding the hardest door in his grief. But he is done with avoidance. He has spent 3 years avoiding, and it has cost him 3 years he will never get back. "There are things I need to tell you," he says. "Things that will be difficult to hear, and that I am only now, tonight, beginning to understand myself." She goes very still, the particular stillness of someone bracing for a blow. "Is it about the dreams?" "It's about everything." He takes her hand, gently, asking rather than taking, and she does not pull away, though her fingers tremble slightly against his. "Will you walk with me? There's somewhere I think we both need to be, for this." He takes her to the lake at the edge of the castle grounds, where the water lies black and silver under the moon, and there, with the night wind carrying the cold green scent of pine, and the warmer stranger scent of her. Standing close beside him, he tells her everything Cale told him, the poison. The bond that does not simply end when the heart that held it stops beating. The strange, impossible, terrible mercy of a love that went looking for a way back and found her, not as a vessel for a dead woman, but as her own whole self, somehow chosen by something neither of them fully understands. Gwyn listens without interrupting, her face pale in the moonlight, her hand gripping his harder and harder as the story unspools, until by the end she is shaking, not with fear exactly, but with the particular vertigo of someone whose entire understanding of herself has just been rewritten in a single conversation. "So the dreams," she says finally, very quietly. "They're not mine. They're hers. No." He turns to face her fully, both hands coming up to frame her face, and his voice when he speaks again is fierce with the need for her to hear this part exactly right. "The dreams may carry her memories, but the woman standing in front of me right now, choosing whether to run from this or stays, that is entirely you. Aveline did not come back, Gwyn. She is gone, and I have grieved her with everything I have. And I will likely grieve her a little for the rest of my life. Because that is simply what loving someone costs when you lose them. But what's happening between us? This pull, this impossible, unasked-for thing, it isn't her trying to live through you. I think it's something gentler than that. I think it's a love that refused to simply vanish into the dark, and found, somehow, a way to keep trying the door even after it should have given up." Gwyn's breath catches, ragged, and her eyes are bright with unshed tears. "I never chose this. Any of it. The dreams, the pull, the way my whole chest goes warm every time you say my name. I didn't ask for any of it, Fenwick." "I know." His thumb brushes her cheekbone, catching the first tear before it falls. "Neither did I. I would have spared us both this, if I could have. Spared you from being born into a story you never agreed to, Spared myself from loving someone twice in one lifetime and being terrified every single day of losing her again. But I am done asking what we deserve. I only know what I feel, standing here, smelling the sea on you under the moonlight, and it is not grief anymore. Hasn't been since the moment you walked through my door. What if I'm not enough, she whispers, and it is the most honest fear either of them has spoken aloud. What if you're only loving the echo of her in me, and one day you look at me and all you see is the woman I'm not? He goes very still at that, and when he answers, his voice has dropped to something low and absolutely certain, a vow rather than a comfort. I have spent 3 weeks falling for the way you walked 4 days for 4 coppers because you refused to be cheated. For the way you held that fevered boy's hand tonight, like he was the only patient in the world. For the way you tell me, every single time, exactly what you're afraid of, instead of pretending you're not afraid at all. His forehead drops to hers, breath mingling in the cold night air, his hands trembling faintly where they hold her face. I am not loving a ghost, Gwyn. I buried my grief for a ghost. What I feel for you is entirely, terrifyingly new, and it has her bond running underneath it like a river under a bridge. But you are the bridge, and the bridge is the only part I am asking to keep. Whatever she might have said in answer is lost in the space between them, closing, his mouth finding hers with a gentleness that holds 3 years of starvation behind it, careful at first and then less careful, her hands fisting in the front of his coat, his arms coming around her like a man finally setting down something he has carried too long. The kiss does not solve anything. It does not undo the poison still unaccounted for, or the danger still lurking somewhere inside his own court, or the terrible vertigo of loving something that found her, rather than something she chose for herself. But for the first time in 3 years, the wolf inside Fenwick, silent, frozen, certain it had nothing left to howl for, settles into something that is not grief at all. It feels, impossibly, like coming home. They do not have very long to simply be happy. This is the cruelty of stories like theirs. The tenderness arrives, finally, fully earned, and the world allows it perhaps a handful of days before it comes calling for its cost. It begins with a sickness that is not a sickness. 3 days after the lake, after the letter Fenwick finally reads alone at dawn and weeps over again, gentler this time, a kind of grief that has learned how to breathe. 3 days into something that has started tentatively, to feel like hope wearing 2 people's faces, Gwyn wakes in her chamber in the castle's east wing with her stomach in violent revolt and a wrongness under her skin that has nothing to do with nerves or excitement. She has been a healer's apprentice long enough to know the difference between sickness of the heart and sickness of the body. This is the body. This is something administered, not something that grew on its own. She tells no one at first, because some old, frightened instinct in her recognizes danger before her conscious mind catches up to name it, and some part of her, the part that has spent 3 weeks discovering she is bound to a love 3 years dead, understands with sick, dawning clarity what kind of enemy she has just made, simply by walking through Fenwick's door. Cale finds her an hour later, pale and shaking in the corridor outside her chamber, and one look at her face tells him everything he needs to know. "Who gave you food this morning?" he says, already moving, already shouting for the castle physician, his old hands surprisingly strong as he catches her before her knees can give entirely. "The kitchen girl. The new one. She said it was a gift from—" Gwyn's voice fractures, the room tilting sideways around her. She said it was a gift from the king. Cale's face goes white. Fenwick sent no such gift. It is, of course, exactly the same poison that killed Aveline. Slower, this time. Less of it. Whoever administered it clearly meant to weaken rather than kill outright. A warning rather than an execution. The work of someone who understands precisely how much damage they can do before the court grows suspicious. But it is unmistakably the same hand, the same cruelty, the same fear of what a bonded king might become if allowed to love freely a second time. Fenwick, when he reaches her bedside 20 minutes later, his face a mask of barely controlled violence, finds Gwyn conscious but gray, her hands cold in the physician's, and something in him that has only just learned how to feel hope again very nearly shatters back into the frozen thing it was 3 weeks ago. "Who?" he says, and the word comes out of him as something closer to a wolf's snarl than a man's voice. "Kale. Who? We don't know yet." Kale's hand on his king's arm is the only thing keeping Fenwick from tearing the castle apart room by room with his bare hands. "But we will. I swear to you on Aveline's memory, we will." Gwyn's fingers find his, weak but deliberate, and the simple fact of her reaching for him in the midst of her own danger undoes something in Fenwick more thoroughly than any rage could. "Stay," she whispers. "Don't go and do something that gets you killed avenging me. I need you here." "I am not leaving this room," he says, and means it with his whole shaking body, and stays beside her through the long night while the physician works, and Kale's people scour the kitchens and the household for the source of the poison. And somewhere in the deepest hour before dawn, when the fever finally breaks and her color begins slowly to return, Fenwick presses his face into her hair and breathes in the sea and mint scent of her like a man making sure, over and over, that she is still real. It is 2 days later that they find the kitchen girl, or rather, find that she has fled, leaving behind a small carved pendant in her abandoned quarters that Kale recognizes instantly, his face going grim and gray. "This belongs to Lady Merwin," he says, very quietly, holding the pendant up to the light. "The king's own cousin, third in line to the throne should anything happen to him without an heir. The pieces assemble themselves with the particular horror of a puzzle you wish you'd never finished. Merwin, who stood to inherit if Fenwick died mateless and childless. Merwin, who poisoned Aveline slowly enough to look like fever, and who has spent 3 years watching her cousin grieve himself half to death with quiet, patient satisfaction, and who panicked, finally, the moment a new bond walked through the throne room doors and threatened to undo 3 years of careful, murderous patience. "She'll run," Fenwick says, already moving for the door, already shifting half into the wolf's shoulders and gait in his fury. "Or she'll try one final desperate thing before she does." He is right on both counts. It is that same night, while the castle is still reeling from the discovery, that Merwin makes her final move. Not against Fenwick, whose guard has tripled, whose fury makes him nearly impossible to approach, but against the one person in the castle whose protection has not yet fully caught up to the danger she represents. Gwyn, still weak from the poison's first dose, still recovering in her chamber under the physician's watch, wakes near midnight to find a figure already inside her room. A blade already drawn and a woman's voice, cold and brittle with 3 years of buried rage, saying her name like a curse. "You should have stayed in your little village," Merwin says. "You should have let him stay broken. Broken kings make excellent regents for ambitious cousins. Healed ones with mates and heirs do not. What happens next will be told differently by everyone who later hears the story. Some will say the healer's apprentice fought like a cornered animal, others that she simply screamed loud enough to wake the whole East Wing. Others still that it was the king's wolf, bursting through a door it had no business breaking, that turned the tide before any blade could fall. The truth is some combination of all three. Gwyn does fight, does scream, does throw the heavy water basin at Merwin's head with enough force to buy herself 3 crucial seconds. And in those 3 seconds, the door does explode inward, and the thing that comes through it is not entirely a man. Fenwick's wolf, silent for 3 years, voiceless even in grief, the part of him that simply stopped trying the moment Aveline died, comes roaring back into the world with a violence that has nothing left in it to restrain. He does not kill Merwin. Some last shred of the king he still is, even mid-shift, even half-mad with terror, for the woman bleeding faintly from a shallow cut along her forearm, holds him back from that final irreversible thing. but he pins her to the floor with a force that cracks the old stone beneath them. And the snarl that comes out of him is not a man's sound at all. And Merwin, for the first time in 3 years of careful, patient murder, finally understands real fear. "Take her to the dungeons," Fenwick says. Once he has shifted enough to speak again, his voice still rough with the wolf's leftover fury, his hands, human again, shaking violently, already reaching for Gwyn, where she sits braced against the wall, breathing hard, her arm bleeding, her eyes wide but steady on his face. Do not let her speak to anyone. Do not let her near a single living soul until I decide what becomes of her. The guards drag Merwin away, still spitting venom about the unfairness of broken men healing, about how dare anyone love twice, about 100 bitter, small things that matter to absolutely no one in the room except her. And Fenwick, finally, kneels in front of Gwyn and gathers her into his arms with a tenderness that makes the violence, moments before, seem like it happened to someone else entirely. "I almost lost you," he says into her hair, his voice breaking on every word. "I only just found you, and I almost lost you in the same week. You didn't." Her good hand comes up to rest against his chest, over the wild, slowing thunder of his heart. "I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. You should." He pulls back just enough to look at her, and the rawness in his face is not the rawness of a king. It is simply a man, terrified, undone, finally honest about the size of what he's asking her to carry. "You should run from this, Gwyn, from me, from this court, from a bond you never chose, and a danger you never deserved. I would understand. I would let you go, and grieve it, and never once blame you for choosing your own life over the wreckage of mine." Gwyn is quiet for a long moment, her thumb tracing slow, absent circles against the fabric of his shirt, over the place where his heart still hammers too fast. "I dreamed of you before I ever knew your name," she says finally. "I tasted a sea I've never seen because some part of a love 3 years dead refused to simply disappear. I have spent my whole life being told my dreams were madness, and I believed it because the truth was too large to hold on to. But I'm done being afraid of the size of this." Her eyes find his, steady now, certain in a way that has nothing borrowed in it at all. "I'm not choosing this because some bond from beyond the grave decided for me. I'm choosing it because I have watched you kneel beside a sick child's bed with more gentleness than half the men I've known in my whole life manage in a lifetime. Because you asked me what I dreamed instead of telling me what to feel. Because the wolf that just tore a door off its hinges to save my life is the same one that's been quietly, carefully learning how to be soft again, for weeks, just for me." Her voice catches, but she pushes through it. "I'm choosing you, Fenwick. Not her, not the bond. You." He makes a sound against her hair that is not quite a sob and not quite a laugh, the sound of a man finally, fully thawing after 3 frozen years. And when he kisses her this time, it tastes faintly of salt. Her tears or his, neither of them is entirely sure, and it doesn't matter at all. Outside, the castle settles slowly back into quiet, the alarm fading, the guards standing watch, and somewhere far below in the dungeons, Merwin rages alone against stone walls that do not care how unfair she believes the world has been to her. But here, in this small room with the broken door, and the bloodied basin, and the moonlight, pooling silver across the floor, the Alpha King of Vareth holds the woman he was never supposed to love twice, and for the first time in 3 years, the silence in his chest is not grief at all. It is only after the danger passes that the harder, quieter work begins, the work of 2 people learning to build something real out of the wreckage of something that found them rather than something they chose. Merwin's trial is swift and grim, conducted with the particular efficiency of a court that has finally, after 3 years, remembered how to function under a king who is present in his own life again. She is stripped of title and exiled beyond the kingdom's borders rather than executed. Fenwick's mercy, not Cale's preference. And when Cale asks him why, late one evening over wine neither of them is really drinking, Fenwick's answer is simple. I have spent 3 years living inside what grief does to a person who has nowhere left to put it, he says. I will not be the reason another soul becomes what she became. Exile her. Let her grow old somewhere far from this throne with nothing but her own bitterness for company. That is punishment enough, and it is mine to give without becoming the very cruelty I am punishing her for. It is a mercy that costs him something. Kale can see that plainly. The old grief in his king's eyes even as he delivers it. But it is also, unmistakably, the choice of a man who has remembered, against every odd, how to be gentle even when gentleness is hardest to give. Gwyn's wound heals clean, no scar left behind beyond a thin, pale line along her forearm that she will, years from now, trace absently while telling this story to someone who asks. The poison's lingering weakness fades within a fortnight under careful tending. Her own healer's training proving useful even in her own recovery. A fact that makes Fenwick laugh, once the real laugh she's only heard described in her own dreams before now, low and surprised and entirely unguarded. You're treating yourself, he says, watching her measure out a tincture with the same steady hands she used on the fevered boy in the lower wards. While I sit here uselessly worrying, someone has to be competent in this relationship. Her mouth curves, teasing, a lightness that would have seemed impossible between them only weeks ago. And worrying isn't useless. It just isn't medicine. He catches her hand before she can lift the tincture to her lips, turns it over, presses a kiss to her palm with a tenderness that has nothing performative in it at all. Just a man, quietly, repeatedly amazed that he is allowed this. I want to ask you something, he says. And I want you to know you can say no, and I will not love you any less for it. She waits, watching his face. That particular stillness she's learned means he is choosing his words with great care. I am not asking you to be my mate because of a bond neither of us chose, he says. I have thought about this more than I have thought about anything in 3 years, and I find that what I want is simpler than that, and harder too. I want to ask you to choose this. Not because Aveline's love went looking for a door and found you standing on the other side of it. Because you, Gwyn Ashford of Thistlemere, healer's apprentice, 4-day walker for 4 honest coppers, because you are the one I want, entirely apart from any of it. She is quiet a long moment, her thumb tracing the line of his jaw, the scar she's noticed there, thin, pale, running just through the edge of his eyebrow. A mark from some old border skirmish he's never fully explained, the one detail of him that belongs to no story but his own. Ask me properly then, she says softly. Not as a king asking a bond to complete him. Ask me as the man who knelt by a sick child's bed and made him laugh through a fever. Ask me that way, and I'll give you my whole honest answer. So he does. He kneels, actually kneels, the Alpha King of Vayrith, on the cold floor of a healer's workroom with tincture bottles rattling faintly on the shelf above them. And he takes both her hands in his, and he asks her, plainly, without a single word of ghosts or bonds or the dead, whether she will choose to spend her life beside him. Gwyn's answer when it comes is not a grand declaration. It is simply her hands tightening around his, and her forehead dropping to meet his, and the word yes, said so quietly it is almost lost beneath the sound of both their hearts beating too fast in the small, ordinary room. And it is, somehow, more powerful for being quiet, more real for asking nothing grand of the moment at all. The court holds its breath in the weeks that follow, the way courts do when a story they've grown used to telling themselves is about to change shape entirely. The grieving king, the frozen throne. The kingdom that learned to live small and careful under a man too, broken to demand much of his people. They have told that story to themselves for 3 years. The way you tell yourself any familiar grief, because familiar grief, however heavy, is at least a shape you know how to hold. This new shape is stranger. Harder to explain at market stalls and over ale in the lower town. A king in love again, 3 years after his mate died, with a stranger who carries her scent and none of her history. There is no simple way to tell that story without sounding either mad or cruel. And so for a time the kingdom simply watches, wary, the way you watch a wound you're not sure has finished healing. It is Gwyn, in the end, who changes their minds. Not through any grand gesture, but through the same patient, unglamorous work she's always done. She walks the lower wards every morning, healer's satchel at her hip, and she treats fevers and broken bones and the particular winter coughs that plague the old and the very young, and she does it without ever once trading on the king's name or expecting deference she hasn't earned through her own two hands. The kingdom, slowly, begins to love her the way you love someone who shows up, day after day, asking nothing back. They're starting to call you the healer queen. Kale tells her one evening, with the dry, fond amusement of a man who has come, against his own careful instincts, to genuinely love this strange, unasked for second chance his king has been given, before you've even married him. "I'm not a queen yet," Gwyn says, laughing despite herself. "No," Kale agrees. "But you've been one in every way that matters since the day you walked 4 days for 4 coppers, and refused to let anyone shortchange you. The title is simply catching up. There is one more piece of the old grief that must be laid down before the new life can fully begin, and it happens on a quiet afternoon in the sunroom, drapes thrown fully open now, sunlight pooling gold across the floor where the foxglove still sits half-stitched on its hoop. Gwyn finds Fenwick there alone, the soapstone wolf pendant, Aveline's token, the one he buried in a drawer the spring before Gwyn ever walked through his door, resting in his open palm, and his face, when he looks up at her, is gentle with a grief that has finally, fully, learned how to coexist with hope instead of crowding it out. "I want to bury this properly," he says before she can ask. "Beside her grave, where it belongs. I've carried it in a drawer for a year, because I didn't know how to let it go, without feeling like I was letting her go too. I understand now that isn't what burying it means. It just means I'm finally ready to let her rest, instead of keeping her suspended in some half-grieved place because I was too afraid to finish." Gwyn crosses the room and sits beside him, taking his free hand in both of hers, and says nothing at all for a long moment, because some moments are better held in silence than filled with words. "Will you come with me," he asks finally, "when I bury it?" "Of course." Her voice is soft, steady. She's part of why we found each other, even if neither of us asked for it that way. I'd like to say something to her, if that's allowed. Even if it's strange. Even if she's not. Even if I'm not her. Something in Fenwick's chest loosens at that. Some last knot of fear he hadn't fully named even to himself. The fear that loving Gwyn might somehow require erasing Aveline entirely, that there was no way to hold both griefs and both loves honestly in the same heart. "It's allowed," he says, his voice rough. "I think she'd want exactly that, actually. She was never a jealous woman. Generous to a fault, my mother used to say. I think she'd be glad somehow that the love didn't simply die when she did. I think she'd be glad it found someone worth finding." They bury the soapstone wolf together, the following week, beneath the old willow, where Aveline is laid, and Gwyn, kneeling in the soft-turned earth beside a king who has finally, fully thawed, says the strange, simple thing that has been sitting in her chest since the day she first dreamed of a sea she'd never seen. "Thank you," she says, to a grave belonging to a woman she never met and somehow carries pieces of anyway, "for not letting this die with you." I don't know if that's a strange thing to say to someone I never knew, but I think I understand, now, what it cost you to keep trying the door even after everyone told you it was closed for good. I'll take good care of what you left behind. I promise you that. The wind moves through the willow's branches, soft and warm, carrying with it the faint, fading note of salt and crushed mint. And then it is simply wind again, ordinary and unremarkable, and neither of them will ever be entirely sure if that was a sign or simply the season turning, and in the end, holding hands at the edge of an old grave with new sun on their faces. It does not matter which. 2 winters pass before this story is finished telling itself, and the kingdom of Vaerith, by the time the second winter turns to spring, no longer remembers itself as a place of frozen grief at all. You would not recognize the throne room now, if you had seen it only in the dust and silence of 3 years' mourning. The heavy drapes are gone from every window in the castle, the sunroom rechristened simply as the morning room, its embroidery hoop finally finished, not by Aveline's hand, but by Gwyn's, the half-foxglove completed in matching violet thread as a quiet act of mercy toward a memory rather than an erasure of one, and hung now on the wall where everyone can see it, a small bright testament to a grief that learned, eventually, how to make room for joy beside it instead of in place of it. Gwyn is queen now, crowned the autumn after Merwin's exile, in a ceremony she insisted be small and plain, much to the dismay of half the court's nobility, who wanted pageantry to match the scale of the story they'd all lived through. She wears, at her throat, a small carved wolf of her own, not soapstone this time, but pale river quartz, commissioned new. Because Fenwick understood, without her ever having to explain it, that she deserved a token that belonged entirely to her own story, rather than borrowed from anyone else's. She still walks the lower wards most mornings, satchel at her hip, though these days she's as likely to be teaching a new generation of apprentices as treating patients herself, passing on the particular steady competence that first walked her, 4 days and 4 coppers worth of stubbornness, straight into a grieving king's life and refused, ever since, to leave it. Fenwick laughs now. Properly, the way she dreamed of before she ever met him, the laugh that reaches his eyes and sometimes doubles him over entirely, usually at the expense of some new disaster involving livestock, because some habits, it turns out, simply belong to House Vaerith, regardless of which woman happens to be running the household. His wolf, once silent for 3 frozen years, runs now most evenings through the castle grounds, often racing alongside another, smaller, equally wild shape that took to shifting, once Gwyn's own dormant nature finally, fully woke beneath the bond's slow unfolding, with the particular delighted ferocity of someone who spent 24 years not knowing what she was capable of, and has decided to make up for lost time all at once. There is, this past spring, a third small shape that sometimes runs with them, still clumsy and stumbling on legs too new to fully trust, a daughter born in the deep of winter with her mother's dark hair and her father's particular, unmistakable scar through one eyebrow, and a laugh, even now, even this young, that reaches all the way to her eyes. They have not told her, yet, the whole strange shape of how her parents found each other, the dreams, the dead mate's scent carried on a stranger, the bond that refused to simply vanish into the dark. There will be time for that story later, when she's old enough to hold its size without being frightened by it. And Gwyn has already decided, quietly, exactly how she'll tell it. Not as a tale of a ghost who came back, but as a tale of a love that simply, stubbornly, refused to stop trying the door, and a girl with salt on her tongue who finally, bravely, decided to open it. On a particular evening in early spring, the kind where the light goes gold and slow over the lake and the willow's new leaves have just begun to unfurl, Fenwick finds his wife exactly where he always finds her at this hour, sitting at the lake's edge, their daughter dozing against her chest, humming something low and wordless that might be a lullaby, and might simply be contentment given sound. He sits beside her without speaking, the way he's learned to do in the comfortable silences they've built together, and after a while she leans into him, her head finding the curve of his shoulder, the way it has 1,000 evenings before this one, and will, he hopes, 1,000 evenings after. "Do you still dream of her?" he asks softly, after a long while, because it is a question he's never quite had the courage to ask directly, even 2 winters into a marriage built on more honesty than either of them knew how to give before they found each other. "Sometimes," Gwyn admits, "less than I used to. I think the bond settled once it found what it was looking for." But sometimes I still wake with salt on my tongue and I don't mind it anymore. It doesn't feel like grief borrowed from someone else's life now. It feels like a thank you note, almost, from someone who loved you enough to make sure you wouldn't have to grieve alone forever. Fenwick is quiet a long moment, watching the lake go gold and still under the last of the light. His daughter's small fist curled against her mother's collar, the whole impossible, undeserved softness of a life he never thought he'd be allowed to have again. I used to think love that strong only happened once, he says finally. That if you were lucky enough to find it, you spent the rest of your life simply surviving its loss. I don't think that anymore. I think love that strong doesn't know how to stop trying. I think it just keeps reaching, however strange the shape it has to take, until it finds a door someone's brave enough to open. Gwyn turns her face up to his, and the kiss they share is unhurried, easy, the kiss of two people who have already chosen each other so many times that choosing again has become simply another way of breathing. I'm glad I was brave enough, she murmurs against his mouth. So am I, he says. Every single day. So am I. And if you walk past the lake at Vayrith on a quiet evening even now, seasons and seasons later, you might catch, carried faint on the wind off the water, the particular note of salt and crushed mint that belongs to no flower or fruit this side of the mountains. The scent of a bond that refused to die, settled finally, fully, into the ordinary, extraordinary shape of a family that chose each other, again and again, long after the story the kingdom once told itself had any business ending happily at all. And that, dear listener, is where we leave them. Not because the story is finished, but because some stories are better left living quietly in the light they finally earned, rather than chased any further than the joy they were always reaching for. Thank you for staying with me through this one, through the grief and the thaw of it, through a king who learned to love again, and a girl who was braver than she ever gave herself credit for. If their story found something tender in you tonight, stay close. There are more waiting, just past this one, for whenever you're ready to fall into them.